So we're going to have with us Julie Lenzer Kirk, who is recently appointed to lead the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship within the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development and Administration. And in her capacity as director, she is charged with driving programs and policies that support innovative economic development, such as innovation-based entrepreneurship and regional innovation clusters. She is also the co-founder and former CEO of the Path Forward Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, a nonprofit that helps women expand economic opportunity by starting and building growth-oriented businesses. So that's Julie right there, right to my left. Next we have... I guess it's pretty obvious by the name, right? You're the only female. Okay. So then we have Earl Gohl, who was confirmed as the federal co-chair of the Appalachian Regional Commission by the U.S. Senate on March of 2010. Earl comes to the ARC with 20 years of experience that includes the Pennsylvania State and Local Government, U.S. Department of Labor, and the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration. His main objective in his position is to ensure that each federal dollar expended by the Commission is an investment in the economic future of Appalachian families that will generate a return for the American taxpayers. Next, we have John Robinson. John Robinson is currently the manager of the entrepreneurship programs at the Ewing, Marion, Kauffman Foundation, and he oversees a number of initiatives to connect founders to financial, human, intellectual, and social capital, and also to expand access to entrepreneurial opportunity. And then lastly, we have Tim McNulty. He is the Associate Vice President of Government Relations at Carnegie Mellon. He supports Carnegie Mellon faculty by enhancing collaboration with federal, state, and local government partners. He assisted CMU's participation in the White House Maker Faire that was held this past June 18th, and that was President Obama's Advanced Manufacturing Partnership and the development of the National Robotics Initiative. So those will be the panelists. I'm going to give you, or go ahead. So the topic or the theme for the session is going to be about the entrepreneurial ecosystem and how each of the panelists contribute to that ecosystem. So just as a refresher, I know most of the people in this audience know that term when we talk about it, but it's made up of individuals, organizations, and institutions that have an interest or a stake in entrepreneurship in their region. So that could be entrepreneurs, it could be educational institutions, it could be government, foundations, investors, bankers. And I had read something on the Harvard Business Review that talked about how no one owns the ecosystem, and stakeholders come to that ecosystem of their communities with different motivations and reasons for support, but that many stakeholders benefit by being part of this greater ecosystem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask the first question, and then I'll join them on the seat over there. And so to start, I'll have each panelist just give a brief overview of themselves and their role, and also to answer this question. What role do you see yourself playing in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and how do you think that that role can align with community colleges? So Julie, I'll go ahead and start with you, and then we'll move down the line.
Okay, and Heather, I'm ADD entrepreneur, so if I forget the question, you'll just have to remind me. Okay. So as I mentioned, so I'm a recovering entrepreneur who's also been building the ecosystem in Maryland. If you've heard of Startup America, I was a Startup Maryland, one of the co-chairs of Startup Maryland. So I worked across the state of Maryland to help connect the ecosystem. So as I said, as a recovering entrepreneur, ecosystem was really important to me as an entrepreneur. And then, so I was fortunate to get to go and build it as the executive director of the Maryland Center for Entrepreneurship. All of that played into my current role now with the federal government and working. We actually fund ecosystems. We fund those of you who are building your ecosystem. And in fact, if you haven't seen our Regional Innovation Strategies grant program out there. We just put a $15 million grant program. I would love to see community colleges partnering to go after some of that money. It would be great. And I can explain more about that later. One of the interesting things about being an entrepreneur in the federal government, and it explains why I have a tick every once in a while, it's it is a very interesting place. But as I got into the Economic Development Administration, one of the things I realized is that there's a lot of thought leadership going on about what economic development really is. And on the screen, you'll see something that we found, and the words are a little out of skew, sorry about that, as a hierarchy of needs in economic development. And communities as they traverse up this hierarchy, they become more agile, more able to be resilient in the face of economic uncertainty, and to have an economic sustainability. So at the very bottom, you have the basic infrastructure, which you typically think of, or a lot of people think of as economic development: roads, bridges, water, energy. But then once you have that, then you move on to technology infrastructure: broadband, cellular, wireless. Business support, which is incubators, accelerators, positive business policies, capital. Then you go into engines of innovation, and that can be universities, R&D, but it can also be commercialization. So the things that you do at the community college absolutely fit into an engine of innovation, especially we were talking about this morning, the keynote, about that mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset, really, really important. And then finally, the connected ecosystem. And really quickly around that then is the culture. A culture of entrepreneurship is really important. And at the Economic Development Administration, we have programs that fund everything along that continuum. And we think it's not an either or, it's not a bridge or an incubator, it's both and. And those are the types of things that we have to support.
Excellent. So can I just ask you to, now that you're in DC and from a national position, what role, how do you see yourself fitting nationally into the ecosystem, and how do you think that could align with the community colleges?
So we fund the ecosystem. So I think that we are catalysts to the programs that whatever the community needs. We have two different types of programs. Our traditional funding has been for distressed communities. And how many EDA grantees do we have in here? People who've gotten money from EDA? Raise your hand. So there's a few of you. So traditionally, EDA has funded, you have to show economic distress. This year, with our regional innovation strategies, you do not have to show economic distress. We got our first funding under the America Competes Act. And so anyone, any community college, it would be great to have you guys partnering with some other players in your community to go after some of these grant monies. One of them is called the I-6 Challenge. This is the fourth year where it's about proof of concept and commercialization centers. Traditionally, that's been university-based, but it doesn't have to be. There's no reason why, and we would be really interested in having some community colleges play into that. The second one is feasibility studies for science and research parks, which might or might not be applicable. But the third one is cluster-based seed funds. So we're providing technical assistance to help you do either feasibility planning or startup of a seed fund around a particular cluster. I think that's all opportunities for EDA to fund community colleges.
Excellent. Okay, Earl, you're next. Could you just give a little bit about yourself and then the role that you see ARC and yourself playing in the ecosystem?
Sure. The map you see is what the United States Congress has decided over the last 50 years constitutes Appalachia. And the stars and the dots are the community colleges that are cited throughout the region by state governments and local communities. Appalachia is really the next great investment opportunity in America. We have entrepreneurs throughout the region, in every county. We have social entrepreneurs, we have small business entrepreneurs, we have big business entrepreneurs. And throughout the states and throughout these communities, there are incredible emerging opportunities in healthcare, in energy, in manufacturing, in tourism, in education. And it's really the challenge and the mission of the Appalachian Regional Commission to work with our partners, the states and communities, to help them and to encourage them and to help finance and facilitate their work in developing ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems, to make sure and to help them and to partner with them to connect the opportunities that they have in their communities with the entrepreneurs that have grown up and live in each one of those states and each one of those counties. And if you look at our map, you see how strategic and how important the community college structure and what the opportunity that the community college structure has for Appalachia in developing and helping to support and connect the various pieces of the ecosystem to make sure that we take advantage and we build a stronger economy in these communities. Now, the reason why the Appalachian Regional Commission wants to do this is because 50 years ago, the United States Congress decided that the region was really a region apart. At that point, of the 380 counties or so that were included in this footprint at that point, 291 of them had poverty rates in excess of 150% of the national rate. 150%. 290 out of about 380 of those counties. Today it's about 108. And over this period of time, the strategies and the direction and the priorities of how ARC worked have changed. At one point, there were significant appropriations of $300 and $400 million that went into investments in infrastructure. And in 1980, the country elected a guy president who didn't think all this stuff was that important. And the folks in Appalachia decided that this commission belonged to them and didn't belong to the other folks. And they fought for it. But the challenge, and one of the interesting things that has happened over this last number of years, that as the appropriation has been reduced, the roles changed, where no longer do you show up and build roads and bridges, but you show up and you work with communities who are very engaged and are very committed to their future. And the important part of it is the partnerships that they create and the ability to grow and to work together. In that piece, in that element, what we see time and time and again, if there's a university who's engaged, they do much better. But when there's a community college that's engaged, and they take an active, important role not in only training the workforce, but in creating the entrepreneurs, is where we're able to make significant changes. And that's where the hope is, and that's the direction that we're going to be going the next several years.
Excellent, thank you. That map is quite interesting because it just shows you the coverage that community colleges have. So John, could you go ahead and answer the next question? So just kind of a little bit about yourself, your role at Kauffman, and then the role that you see yourself playing in that ecosystem.
Sure. My role at Kauffman is I'm a senior program officer. For the past 2 or so years, I've been running our community college initiative. And I'm moving now into a role where we're going to be focusing on a number of metros around the country, looking to help those cities evolve into more entrepreneurial ecosystems, more entrepreneurial economies. The role of the Kauffman Foundation, if I could steal Julie's pyramid again, can we put that back up? Is that? It's really good, I like it a lot. The Kauffman Foundation really tries to operate in the top 3 of the slices of that pyramid. Obviously not underestimating the vital need for the bottom 2 pieces. But we are an evangelist for the essential role that the entrepreneur has to play in national competitiveness and prosperity and the competitive prosperity of communities and of individuals. We are a leading source of research into both that role of the entrepreneurship that the entrepreneur has, and then also increasingly into the performance of specific assets in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So understanding the connectivity between those assets, how well they work in communities, the performance of specific programs, because there is a tremendous need for what we like to refer to as myth-busting in entrepreneurship support, to move beyond optics and vanity metrics to show what is really creating productive activity, efficient firm growth, and all the economic dividends that come from that. And we are a source of entrepreneurship education. Probably a great many of you in the room know us maybe best for our fast track curriculum that we're very pleased that many of you are users of, clients of, partners in. And I think it's fair to say that we are early stage investors, not of course actual investors but grant makers, but early stage investors in in the next generation of high-impact programming for entrepreneurship support. So if you know us from Fast Track, you may also know us as the organization that helped to get Startup Weekend started, or the Ice House program, or the Code 2040, which creates opportunities in technology for Black and Latino students, or Global Entrepreneurship Week, or any number of programs that really, we hope, are making considerable contributions, not directly from the Kauffman Foundation, but through our partners, making considerable contributions to ecosystems. And then lastly, I would say, I hope I'm right in saying that we are a catalyst of collaboration in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, both within communities and then nationally, because we are very fortunate to play a role where we probably have eyes on more programs nationally, more people doing good work, and can make for the appropriate collisions, the collaborations, the sort of the creating that patchwork of assets that is so essential in a dynamic and effective ecosystem, and that's what we do.
Okay, excellent. And then Tim, I know you're new to this crowd, and I'll just tell you the quick story about how I met Tim. So actually through Jen Worth at AACC, we had been working a little bit with Dale Doherty from the Maker Faire movement, and Dale's work caught on at the White House, and they wanted to have a National Maker Day that was held, I think that was June 18th of this past year. And then Tim, you were an active collaborator and really helping get different organizations to that Maker Faire, and you had reached out to us and seen who would be of interest at the community colleges. So we put the call out to the members. A lot of people signed on to be interested in having this maker movement brought. So I know you're at Carnegie Mellon, but where we really connected was that role, and how I think it's interesting how something like that can take things mainstream, because obviously a lot more people than just community colleges or institutions, people that really connect to that maker movement. So I guess with that background, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you see yourself fitting into the ecosystem?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Heather. I don't feel completely new to this crowd, and in a former life in economic development in Pennsylvania, I funded a lot of community college initiatives around the state. That was an easy call to make, because if you were dealing with communities that were facing just radical change in their economies, the community colleges were always the anchor that you could build around. So I feel, in many respects, I feel very much at home here today, and Carnegie Mellon is in what one of our newspaper reporters in Pittsburgh calls Pittsburgh the Paris of Appalachia. So I don't know if that's, but that's all right. But and Carnegie Mellon is an I6 challenge recipient, and I also encourage you to apply for those. They're great programs. But as Heather said, I think I'm here because I had a little bit of a window working with many of you who are in this room and our colleagues at art institutes and four-year institutions, kind of coming together to support the president's call to the first National Maker Faire, and just being a part of playing a very small role in what became 153 institutions of higher ed joining to support the fair and to make commitments to advance making. I did get this incredible window on this maker movement that's taking place. And just to give you some parameters for that, so just if you look at the commitments that came out of the letters that went to the president, in just the last 3 months, there's been about 150,000 square feet of new maker spaces unveiled at higher education institutions, involving millions of dollars of new investments, and oftentimes tied up to entirely new degree programs or minors or curricula. And what's also fascinating about that incredible burst of energy is it spans the continuum. So my institution's opening space, a lot of research universities and land-grant institutions, art institutes, but at the forefront, without question, I think at the forefront of this are community colleges. And that really doesn't surprise me, because you were creating maker spaces, for industry and students to come together before there was a maker movement. But I would just close with maybe 2 observations about how that relates to the ecosystem. I think, first of all, the maker movement and entrepreneurship, they share a common DNA about efficacy and agency and empowering people, so it's natural that they're going to grow together. And I think in growing together, we're going to see a transformation of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and with a focus on production, with a focus on new tools and new players, companies like Autodesk and Intel maybe taking on roles that venture capitalists would have in more traditional ecosystems. And the second implication, I think, is that for this to really work, for this to really reach its potential, it's just going to be imperative that we collaborate, that 4-year institutions and 2-year institutions come together. Because I think through the maker movement, we're going to be reinventing each other. We're going to learn a lot from you about learn by doing and how you build a learn by doing environment. And I think at the same time, we have a chance together to invent entirely new tools for learning, for how to apply learning in the context of entrepreneurship and maker programs. So I think together we're going to be reinventing this ecosystem, and I think it's going to be a very exciting time.
Thank you, Tim. So I'm going to ask you this next question, and anyone can answer it. We don't have to go down the line. So just be thinking about it, and I'll make some other quick comments. So as you think about the work, maybe in your present role or even in previous roles, and if you think about yourself in the community and the ecosystem, what are examples of success and or failure or just part of the process that you could share with the audience that you think could be applicable for the community colleges? So that's the question. But I will also say that NACCE, we spent some work identifying the role of the community college in helping entrepreneurs and in being in the community, and so that there was an understanding that there's all these different players, and so what should the specific role of the community college be? And some of the things that we found is depending on the community and the size and the makeup, it's quite different. So we found in rural communities, oftentimes they could play a more central role. And in more urban areas, there's so many resources, they could play a particular role, but that you'd have to really uncover who the other people are in the community. So we spent some time with colleges doing ecosystem mapping, just getting a lay of the land, a better understanding of what's out there, and then being in a position where you could then, as Sarah said, make the ask, this is what we could do, what do you have, and how could we bring that together? So any thoughts on sort of lessons learned from successes or failures as you go about really working within ecosystems of local communities?
The one thing I would say is kind of a challenge is there's no finish line. There's no there's a lot of goals and there's a lot of mileposts that you want to get to. But just because you've completed one project successfully, all that means is you have more time for the next one. And that this is an ongoing process that we're going to spend our careers working on. And the good news about that is it is incredibly fulfilling. You're able to accomplish a great deal, and it helps your community grow and reach a potential that a lot of folks didn't think it can reach. So I think that is a lesson I continue to learn over the last number of years, that it's an ongoing process. There's no finish line, but there are a lot of things you can accomplish.
I would say there is no box. So forget about thinking outside the box. There is no box. When I was working in Howard County, Maryland, the Maryland Center for Entrepreneurship, Howard Community College, it was a natural partnership. And in fact, Betty Noble, who's here somewhere, she runs our entrepreneurship program. She sat on my advisory board. And it was really important to look at the synergies between what we were doing and what they're doing and how we could flow people from maybe the community college into our incubator and back. But then also they had a program around teaching technology commercialization, working with the USDA. And typically, you think of technology transfer as a university thing, but why? Why does it have to be just a university thing? There's a lot of, there's no reason that community colleges can't play an active role in that, and I hope you are. And so I would just say, forget about the box and figure out, where the gaps are and where the needs are in your community.
Excellent.
Well, this is a panel in large part about collaboration, and I do think that that's an essential ingredient. For what it's worth, all the folks in the room representing community colleges, I think the problem here in most communities is not you. I mean, the community college is usually the most collaborative entity in any given ecosystem. Very low ego, very practical sensibilities in how you want to do the work that you do. And you'll have to find ways to effectively partner with organizations that are going to try to take a lot more of the credit and maybe potentially condescend to the role that you play in the ecosystem. That Kauffman has spent a lot of time in recent years trying hard to change the perception of what a community college is for, and to elevate the profile of the community college in the ecosystem. That it is truly the most democratic place to go as an entrepreneur for the highest level support that you need to receive. And this is a problem, I think, across a lot of entrepreneurship support. There are very few actors in the ecosystem that aren't in some way rent-seeking from the entrepreneur, that are not in some way trying to extract value from the entrepreneur. And the great benefit that the community college brings to the ecosystem is that they take an education-first approach to entrepreneurship. That I don't think that you can really trust a tech transfer office to.
That's just a general. You don't have to finish there. You just stop there.
No, I mean I think entrepreneurship, vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems are entirely about talent, entirely about human capital. And I think the community colleges are entirely about talent and entirely about human capital. And very few other entities can say that.
And I would add to that, connecting the resources, I think, is a really important
yeah.
thing. And that community colleges don't always have the resources that they need, and so they, by nature, have to become connectors.
Absolutely. And as a part of this connectivity piece, and as a part of the sort of the imperative to be the most collaborative actor on the block, the primary imperative for the community college is to get off campus, is to not define yourself only by enrollment and student completion and credit hour, and not to distract from. I mean, of course, you're always going to be assessed on enrollment. You're always going to be assessed on completion. But if you really want to make a difference to the entrepreneurs in your ecosystem, then you have to get off campus, because that's where they are, and that's where your partners are. And in our experience at Kauffman, the colleges that have been most successful have been the first movers in that. So it's the Catawba Valley and then AB Tech and Maricopa, and the schools that have really embraced that mission, that they have an economic development role to play that is beyond student success. And so it's mostly, I think, a success story in our experience with the schools that we've worked for.
Tim, did you want to add to that question?
The only thing I'm going to add, just I could talk a lot about failures I've seen, but I won't move on. But that I've been a part of. But now I think the one thing I would just touch on is just how big the opportunity space is for community college, and particularly your entrepreneurship programs. And all the direction of technology is about democratization of access and capability, from Kickstarter, so that you can be in a rural state and access funding to your startup, and you can have the technologies very cheaply to make your prototype and get it to market. And there are these entirely new e-commerce venues that allow you to get channels to very large companies relatively easily. So I think you've got these incredibly powerful tools, and your community colleges are uniquely positioned because you're really the intersection point for all of us. The student coming out of high school, the adult going back to learn, the connection to the four-year institutions, the much closer connection to business than other institutions. So you've got this amazing array of tools. All of them relate to entrepreneurship as the starting point, and it's just a tremendous time for you to be doing what you're doing.
Really quickly, just to add on what John was talking about, talking about failures. The failures that I've seen have been because of ego, because of that siloed, right? Because it's because I know best. I don't need anybody, and I think that our keynote this morning talked about that. It's that I have everything I need. I don't need you, and that's where you see the failures come.
Yeah, no, I was very complimentary before to community colleges to that regard, being low ego, and I think that's mostly the case. But you really have to work at that, because there are examples that I'm aware of that community colleges have turned down incredible opportunities that have been handed to them on a platter because they weren't high enough up in the press release. And it behooves you to be the bigger actor to really make sure that the good value is the good products are being brought to your constituents rather than who's getting the credit.
To add to that, I'm on an advisory board in Springfield for the community of Springfield, and one thing I will add to that is leadership. So there's ego, but there's also sometimes a lack of leadership. So we meet on a fairly regular basis and have pretty much the same conversation, because everyone's busy and doing their own thing, but it needs a unifying leader. And so I would say that the role of the community college, when you see a vacuum of leadership, is to be the voice and to be that leader, because they're perfectly positioned for it. And as long as you have, especially the president or someone else on board, they can lead that effort and be a unifying because of the lack of ego. I think that's really important. All right, so in the spirit of, I'm going to change this up just a little bit, so I'll say it once so you have time to prepare while I say something else. But in the spirit of what Sarah said this morning about the ask, I think that's really important because that gives us the takeaway. So as you start the day next week, I would say, what would be your ask of community colleges that would help you in your role? So what would be your ask to community colleges? And then what would you like community colleges to ask from you? And maybe, because the Twitter handle's on here, except for Tim, but we'd have the contact information, maybe this is an opportunity, too, where all of you, even though you won't be able to during this session, but it'll be an opportunity where you can make an ask to them. We'll make your information available. Any thoughts on that? What would you ask of the community colleges, and what would you want them to ask of you?
I think from Kauffman's perspective, the folks in the room here work with entrepreneurs at a far greater rate on a daily basis than we have the opportunity to engage directly with. We are, for the most part, not a direct service organization to the entrepreneur. We work through intermediaries. And so I believe very passionately in the virtues of, call it user-centered design or lean methodology or effectuation, whatever brand you want to use for it. But we don't have the opportunity to test our hypotheses with our end user very frequently. And so my request to the community colleges would be to communicate to us what you're learning on a day-to-day basis. What are your entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs asking you for? What are they not getting well enough? What resources are not performing at optimal levels? And our job at Kauffman is to hopefully come in and fix that, theoretically. So we need sample size. We need lots and lots of data from you, basically, is the big ask. And what can we do for you? Well, I work at a foundation. I hope that we might be occasionally in a position to help underwrite good work, occasionally.
I'll dovetail on that. I have money. I would like to see some good projects come from collaborations that involve community colleges. That, to me, is, especially now that we've removed the distressed community. I know a number of you probably have not looked at EDA because it had a distress requirement. We don't. So we would like to fund your projects. November 3rd is our deadline. Please go online and take a look. But, and there'll be more. There will be more of that coming. But I also would like to say that one of our other interesting areas that we're looking at is rural, how to help rural communities to connect with resources, and they know that they want to do this entrepreneurship thing, but they don't know how. One of the projects we're looking at and working with, potentially with you guys and with the DRA, Delta Regional Authority, is to do a mentor-protege program between rural communities who are trying to build this entrepreneurial ecosystem. And if you have other needs that the federal government can help with, please let us know about that. Let me know about that, and we'll look at that and see how we can help to be the catalyst for your community.
I'm slightly disadvantaged. I think I'm the only one who doesn't give away money on the panel. But I do want to say, I thought the speakers this morning, Dr. Lamb and the other speakers this morning, did a phenomenal job of just highlighting the urgency of the situation, the rate of change, the nature of change. And I think very simply, again, as I said early on, I think the most critical thing we can do together is, kind of break down the silos between the 4-year institutions and the 2-year institutions, and create more formal platforms for us to collaborate on. I think that's going to be essential for how well we're able to respond to those urgencies.
My ask is to be bold, to not hold back, to understand and to be engaged in the community, and to, when other people have sharp elbows as well. But you have, in community colleges, I know throughout Appalachia, have great resources and have great leadership. And the opportunity is now, as community colleges, as we all know, started when I was young, and it was for people like me who weren't ready to go to college yet. And then a couple of recessions later, community colleges took a big role in workforce. And as this economy changes to 50% of the workers being contingent workers, the next great preparation is for an entrepreneurial nation. And community colleges at this level have the opportunity and really have an obligation to set the direction, to be the leaders. And in our communities in Appalachia, they're the centers of a lot of energy, a lot of creativity. And with partnerships with folks like the Appalachian Regional Commission, we can put together pretty good ecosystems that can succeed and can work to make sure that number of 108 counties with high poverty rates goes down even further. Thanks so much.
Excellent. So to sum up what you just said, you have money. So there's a pretty straightforward way. You have a process that's in place. You're talking about the colleges being bold, maybe being a stronger voice in their community for themselves. So like you said, other people talk about themselves vocally, and so why not the community college on behalf of the college? And then, John, you talked about data, the need for data. So maybe reporting that up, having a mechanism to report out what the community colleges are seeing. We've also seen that as really important, and it's something we've been trying to work on. I know many of you have taken the Presidents for Entrepreneurship pledge, and then we've built an assessment around that, and I know many of you have taken that, and we're working to validate that survey. But I think even deeper, what John's talking about is the number of people that you touch, the businesses, the results of those businesses, maybe some jobs created. And I know a lot of you actually have that data. So it's something that we've been talking about at NACI is how do we get that data from you individually so that we can tell the community college story stronger? Because when we have media reach out to us, that's usually what they're asking for. So we kind of hedge a bit. We can give anecdotal stories. We can give specific numbers for colleges, but we don't have that aggregated. And then, Tim, I thought it was very interesting, too, from the university level, because going back to Startup America when it was starting, I remember going to Startup Connecticut, and Scott Case was there, and it was at UConn. There was not a community college in the room. And I was like, where are the community colleges? Because they had all the universities, and it was on the ground of a university. And I mean, it's very good because all that's happening, but this chunk, this whole middle section was just missing out of the conversation. So I think that's also very important to make that connection. So I'd like to thank you all for being on the panel and for giving your thoughts, and everyone's Twitter handles there that you can follow them, and we'll get you Tim's information too. But can we give a round of thanks for our panel today?